Today's video has been sponsored by X4 Timelines, the newest expansion for X4 Foundations. Timelines features a new, mysterious story that introduces players to every element of X4's gameplay. While these scenarios and story are separate to the base game, progressing through the lore and history of the X series through these new missions unlocks bonuses like classic ships for use in the base game's sandbox. And that base game is also receiving a big update as it hits 7.0, further improving the gigantic simulated single-player universe for you to explore. You can dogfight, start and grow a faction, or even play it like an RTS by sending your own NPCs off to do your work for you. There's also a fully simulated economy that starts from the raw resources that everything is manufactured from, creating many ways of exploiting the production chain to get rich, including piracy. Also, everything can be customized, from the ships you fly to the stations you can build. And you can see these on foot too! Check out X4 Timelines on Steam and GOG, where the base game, X4 Foundations, is on sale for its largest discount ever, or grab both in the X4 Discovery Pack. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hujuana and today we're examining exploration, a deeply romanticised but all too often simplified pillar of starfaring sci-fi. First, let's define exploration and why it's done. Simply put, it's going out and discovering what's out there. It's not necessarily about being the first person to a place, as often explorable areas have people already living there. But you or your nation and culture might not have ever met them, so it's still a discovery. Exploring can also have specific practical goals like mapping or finding exploitable resources, which are activities that even simple animals like bees engage in. But it can also be done for scientific purposes like cataloguing new species and such. Sci-fi exploration games often include this element, but as a really boring scanning mechanic filled with procedurally generated things that lack soul and feel samey despite being in vastly different environments. The basic scanning is kinda right, since it does demonstrate the cataloguing process of going out, finding new plants, animals, rocks, whatever, and naming them, getting their appearance and behaviour in context, and maybe taking a sample. Games massively simplify this down because these observations can be a long and focused task which would make for boring gameplay, but so is this scanning. To expand on scanning, an exploration ship should probably have plenty of sensors for surveys and mapping, as well as disposable and reusable probes for getting additional close-up data. Get the ship to do that boring stuff for you. A good exploration ship also needs to be tough and sturdy, while also being efficient enough to make the journey in the first place, and have enough left over for extra maneuvers. Most sci-fi tech doesn't care much about that last point, but fuel or propellant is certainly something to think about for things skewing more realistic. All this is needed because real exploration is extremely hazardous, since you're so far from civilization and rescue. These long voyages could have all sorts of unknown hazards, so your vessels need to be able to get through them safely, or be able to avoid them. Rugged and simple systems will be very welcome as well, as they will be damaged, and something simple and reliable and easy to fix makes everything easier. Not everything can be simple though. Key things may be high-tech and complicated, but if that breaks, it may be impossible to repair in the field, so bring along spares. The other supplies you need are going to be consumables, and lots of them since you can only consume what you bring, and you may be away for a very long time. Depending on if volume or mass is the constraining factor, the food would end up being either extremely calorie dense or extremely low weight. For exploration vessels of yore, and exploratory trips of any kind really, consumables were a limiting factor. Extremely simple food that stores well and is calorie dense like hardtack or pemmican was required because there was nothing like canning or refrigeration. Modern day technology like freeze drying is very similar to many of the older techniques for preserving foodstuffs in that it dehydrates it. The benefit over those old techniques is that freeze drying doesn't damage the food's structure, nutrients or flavours anywhere near as much, and rehydration is easy as long as water is available. Speaking of freezing, cryogenically storing the crew during travel is a great way of vastly extending how long consumables last, and is a very common thing to see in sci-fi, along with various forms of induced hibernation. But back to food, and another major downside of space travel: you probably can't forage or hunt. Sure, there may be alien life out there, but it has a very good chance of not being compatible with the human body. It could be toxic, poisonous, an allergen, or just straight up not able to be digested. There's already a ton of things like that in living matter on Earth, and we evolved here. This isn't universal though. Some settings like Star Trek have a very high level of compatibility between life forms across the galaxy, so these techniques are more viable there. Something else to consider is how important food is for morale. Subsisting on calorific, nutrient-rich gruel may keep one alive, but a proper meal with varying ingredients and flavours can keep one happy. High-quality treat supplies must be rationed out in order to keep morale up, saved for holidays or the darkest of times when the crew really needs the boost. Luckily, the other consumables, air and water, are both highly recyclable. They're also fairly common to find in asteroids and planetary rings in a form of water ice, which can be cracked to get oxygen as well. Collecting water ice asteroids and harvesting their goodies does require specialist equipment. It's not as easy as zapping it with a laser so it goes boom and magically gets vacuumed up. On the face of it, it sure seems like ice harvesting equipment would be handy to have, but as I said before, air and water are both extremely recyclable. That harvesting equipment could instead be more supplies, or a better recycling system, or something else entirely. But it sure would be missed in the event something goes wrong though, wouldn't it? While on the subject of recycling, it's also possible to create food aboard a ship using something like hydroponics for low-tech settings or replicators for high-tech settings. That latter one also entirely removes the need to store actual food items since you can just create it out of base matter. Hard to beat that for long-term storage. But that reveals a problem. Tech in sci-fi is often too good, removing a huge chunk of potential narrative options or even just vibes. One of Voyager's major issues was that they rarely ever felt like they were far away from civilization and home because they had all this utopic tech that removed a lot of tension. That's why things need to go wrong in these settings. You can have all that super duper stuff like replicators, but maybe they break one day. That creates a narratively interesting situation that to some extent actually parallels the difficulties that a ship far from known civilization would experience, just like an old explorer. Imagine they have to rapidly convert part of the ship to store food supplies and have to frantically replicate basic ingredients before the whole system goes down. Then their supplies could be a long-term plotline that could get revisited later on, like the Little Famine arc in Season 3 of Battlestar Galactica. It's not all bad in the land of Trek though. Enterprise was pretty great for exploration vibes. Yes, the early seasons were often a very sanitized, safe and comfortable affair, much like the earlier shows, but that's because in some ways Star Trek is more about adventure than exploring. Yeah, it's splitting hairs, but the former is more suited to entertainment. That changed in Enterprise Season 3 when the crew was stuck far from safe port and even had to resort to a bit of piracy at one point. This situation may not have been in the service of exploration, but it did capture the struggles that early explorers often faced. Stargate did exploration in an entirely different way, and there was usually the potential of a safe return to Earth. That is, until Universe, which trapped a crew on an ancient ship impossibly far away from home. They did have the weird person-swapping thing, so they could sort of visit family, but that was really creepy and was a temporary solution at best. They were permanently stuck out there, having to make do with what they could find. In a way, this is an example of the biggest danger of all, being stranded. Imagine what it would be like to be stuck with no rescue and no way to contact home. Exploration is a key part of the science fiction genre and forms the very foundations of much of sci-fi based on space travel. It's often a very safe and sanitized affair, a nice and comfortable journey to see what's out there. But this doesn't reflect the inherent dangers that long journeys away from civilization bring with them, leaving huge narrative potential unexploited. But that is of course the prerogative of the creator. Choosing exactly what story they want to tell is entirely up to them. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and spacefighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.